Hello and welcome to episode 209 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week on the show, a teenage listener in rural Alberta laments the ignorance of his friends and neighbors on the benefits of clean energy. I say just put on a cowboy hat and go along with whatever they say. Unless, of course, they badmouth the dinosaurs who lived among us 5,000 years ago.
Oh, but of course. A new study reveals that EV charging has been financially beneficial for utilities. Turns out if you offer a service and people pay for that service, it's financially beneficial.
We're heading for a serious overcapacity of batteries. It could be just like what happened with solar panels. They could go way down in price. Or what happened with my bowels this week as I had a stomach flu, Brian.
Oh no! The government of Italy has announced that it's illegal for Alfa Romeo to call their new EV the Milano because it's actually made in Poland. This is akin to French laws that proclaim champagne must come from the Champagne region of France, or that the Clean Energy Show must be produced using clean energy, which it is, mostly.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week's show, Tesla cuts its workforce and its full self-driving price. That's the software that drives the car by itself in all situations. The Bureau of Land Management says they will eliminate environmental reviews for geothermal projects on government lands in the United States, and also will have the lightning round, where we'll have lots of information about the latest headlines in clean tech and transportation. Brian, I've had the norovirus, and that's why we're a little late this week. I apologize to our listeners. Some noro facts for you. Never leave home. That's
you actually left the house?
I left the house and got sick.
Yeah. Just one time you leave the house. This is what happens.
I had lunch with breakfast with a friend, and boom. Yeah. And, you know, the last time I had breakfast at the same restaurant with different people, I almost I came within hours of getting COVID because my friend was diagnosed with COVID. Just
later tested, yeah.
And you know how you can be symptomatic, or you can be contagious before you have symptoms. So
I think you need a better class of friends. I think that's the problem.
Just cleaner, I don't know, a hazmat suit to leave home. Here's a fact for you. 10 microns of virus for the norovirus can make you sick if you get that in you. Viz 100 to 300 for COVID. So you know how COVID's very contagious? This is more contagious.
Yeah, well, norovirus ripped through our household about 20 years ago, and yeah, it's just
20 years ago?
About that, yeah.
That's how long it's been?
Yep.
Jeez. Yeah,
I've been fairly healthy since then, but it was a nightmare. I feel sorry for you.
Well, I was just talking to my partner about how often we've had it over the years. I wonder how many times we've had it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've had it a few times. She works with children and brings home everything. She's a petri dish because she's a social worker that works with children. And not only is she a petri dish, now there's bed bugs and cockroaches out there that she has to deal with. And they have to come up with, people educating them how to go to people's homes. And she has to, she comes home and basically takes her clothes off in the backyard and puts them in a pile, and it's a big ordeal. So, yeah, and only bleach, by the way. You know how those household cleaners say it kills 99.9% of germs? That 0.1% is the norovirus.
Oh, no.
I researched that. It takes pure bleach to do it. You can wash it, of course, with soap because it'll come off and go down the drain. On my wife's sleep app, she has a sleep app that detects snoring because she's wondering if she has any sort of sleeping issues. And it said talking but it was me vomiting. And she recorded. I didn't listen to it. I don't want to listen to it. I don't want to talk about it. But
some of those apps can record your sleep talking, which is kind of funny.
Oh, no. See, I wouldn't want to hear that. But okay, what's new?
Okay, so I just want to give a quick shout out to REV Auto Group, our local used EV dealer. I've given them my Tesla Model 3 to sell, our very first EV, a 2020 Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus. And we've since upgraded to a Model Y, so we've taken it down to REV Auto Group. So if you want to buy my car and you're local here in Regina, Saskatchewan, where we are, and I think there's also like a EV kind of expo this weekend as well, and REV Auto Group is sponsoring it, so you can go talk to them there and somebody buy my car. It's famous. It was on the Detail Geek YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's going to add an extra grand to it right there. I mean, come on.
That's right. Over 1 million people watched that car get cleaned on the Detail Geek channel on YouTube, if you want to look for it there. But yeah, please, somebody buy my car.
But
it's
also
great.
warning
It's
you
4
about,
years old.
You're going to find a Starbucks stick somewhere under the seat if that episode taught me anything.
Yeah, I think they're gonna clean it up nice. But anyway, so as you know, one of my hobbies is to read daily comic strips, like from newspaper comic strips. This is one of the reasons I really held on to a physical newspaper subscription for a long time. It was only a couple of years ago I canceled my physical newspaper subscription because it's just one of those daily rituals I like, the morning paper, and then part of that is reading the comic strips, which I've been doing since I was 5 years old. It's one of the few habits I've had, probably the only habit I've had since I was 5 years old. So instead of getting a newspaper every day, I have a bunch of bookmarks basically for websites and whatnot. So I try and replicate the experience, but that includes reading the comic strips. So there's a couple of different websites, Go Comics and Comics Kingdom, where you can sign up and subscribe and visit every day and look at your daily comic strips. But anyway, there's one I'd never read before, a comic strip called Gasoline Alley. And I was always aware of it. It's one of these old-timey comic strips. It's literally been going for over 100 years, if you can believe it. It started in 1918.
How is that possible? They didn't have gasoline 100 years ago, did they?
1918,
Oh.
Yeah, they would have had gasoline by then, I
Okay.
think. Yeah. So, it's been running for over 100 years. It's currently the longest-running comic strip that's still in production.
I assume it's not by the same person, or they're very healthy.
The original creator retired and cashing royalty checks, probably. Sure. At the age of 140.
Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah, that's the life.
Anyway, I just happened to come across it because the current storyline is interesting. It pertains to the clean energy show. So the town is called Gasoline Alley. This is where the comic strip gets its name from. And it's this fictitious small town somewhere in rural America. And it's a quaint comic strip. It's kind of, I would say, conservative. It's sort of like an old-timey family values, rural values kind of comic strip. But the plot line currently is that the mayor of the town is thinking of changing the name because the name Gasoline Alley is old-fashioned and has possibly negative connotations. And so they're thinking of changing the town to Electric Acres, which I thought was a lot of fun.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems like it's not worth it if it's something that's 100 years old. But
Well,
it's a storyline.
I mean,
it's a storyline.
It's a storyline, and the characters in the strip are quite upset about this. So I imagine this is not going to come to pass, and something that's been running for 100 years is not going to do something that drastic. But, it shows you where we're at today.
It's interesting. I was reading something this morning about Route 50 in the United States that goes from California to Maryland, I think. And it's one of the most desolate strips for EV charging, but I guess they filled that in recently. And also the Canadian government had a budget yesterday which extended the EV credits, but it didn't update its program for EV infrastructure, which is still lacking, and I expected a lot more. I know those credits are going to go away with the change in government in the next year or two, but it'd be nice if that investment in the infrastructure was there, because that's a necessary thing, and I don't know if they're doing it as well as they could be either. I just wanted to mention that full self-driving is now like $100 a month. You can get it as a subscription, and you paid, 14 grand Canadian or something like that?
I think it was a bit less than that.
It was a bit less than that, but it works out to more. I think it would take 11 years for that to pay off. And I'm wondering, on behalf of listeners, if you're pissed off, if you have, Elon Musk could kill your children, you'd be fine, wouldn't you? I mean, nothing could be happening.
Well, I'm annoyed that it still doesn't work after having paid for it a few years ago, about 3 years ago.
Fortunately, you were able to transfer it, though. Otherwise, it would have been gone with that car that you're selling. And by the way, you're selling it as a commission, right? It's a consignment. I don't think we mentioned that. And it worked really well for me with my Prius. And Priuses were at a sort of an all-time high, or just coming down from an all-time high. So that's how I got into an electric car on my income, which was nice.
No, I think you timed that well. You got a great price for the Prius. If I'd sold my car about 2 years ago, I probably could have got more than I paid for it. But I waited.
Even a little more than a year ago, I was looking, they were quite high.
Yeah.
But now
there's,
I noticed that even REV, the place you went to, has 3 or 4 of the same cars that you have. So they've got
they've got a Model X. They've got a couple of 3s. It's nice.
Were they nice to you? Did you find them good to deal with?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. And
did you deal with the person that I sent the contact to you?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
that's nice.
Maybe you'll get a little taste of that sale.
I should get a taste. The show should get a taste. And it should be mentioned in the description that it was featured on the Detail Geek, the million views. That Ross Gerber. Do you know who Ross Gerber is? The investor.
Yeah, he's one of a Wall Street analyst.
He says on Twitter it is bullish that a 12K FSD now goes for $99 a month. The good news is people will pay that amount, and many more will use it. The bad news for the 400,000 loyal beta testers who got musked. I can't even say that. Musked. ED. So you got musked. According to him.
It'd be, if it all worked, everything would be fine. But, the new version is a lot better. So hopefully we're getting close.
So unlike what we talked about last week on the show, they're scrapping, apparently, or at least seriously shelving the cheaper model of car and making that a robotaxi. They're putting all their bets on the robotaxi self-driving working. And if it doesn't, it's going to be a problem. If it does, good for them. They'll be a huge success. You'll be a billionaire again, as you should be. And still one of the few billionaires with a podcast, I think, or at least a good podcast.
Yeah, no, I invested in Tesla many years ago, and the investment has been generally good to me. But it remains to be seen. We don't have the full information, but it does sound like they're going to focus more on the robotaxi than on putting a steering wheel in it. But, so the question remains, is the progress on FSD happening fast enough to make this a reality? But either way, it does seem to have been ill-timed that, there are cheaper EVs coming out now, especially in China, and it's too bad that Tesla doesn't have one to compete with them.
Yeah. So Emily Eaton is one of the editors of that book that I was talking about that I'm quoted in, and we did a feature on last week. I said that I wanted to get the author of the refinery, because it was about the local refinery that's, 3/4 of a mile away from me.
Yeah, the person who interviewed you and wrote the chapter that you're mentioned in.
Yeah, she's in my friend's band. Somehow.
Right, yes.
I have no idea why, but that's another story. I'd have to leave
Excellent
the house to find out. I asked her to be on the show, and she took several days to get back to me and said she has to decline. She thought about it long and hard. It's one of those situations where she seems to be scared, like of litigation or of backlash or something like that. But I am going to the book launch this weekend. I'm going to be on a panel there where I'll have 5 minutes to give my situation as a citizen who has to deal with that refinery. And I may talk to some of the other authors who have been on the record talking about the refinery. I'd love to get deep on, because, it's so covered up that I would like to know what they know that they couldn't put in the book. And maybe a couple of drinks will help. I don't know. We'll see. I can't afford any truth serum from the dark web. Otherwise, I'd go that route. But yeah. So on Twitter, though, one of the editors of that book, Emily Eaton, retweeted one of my things about the book. She said, I was lamenting about how bad it is for people who live here. And she says,
yeah,
she said, it's worse than that, worse than what I said. She goes, it's not jobs we are trading health and environment for, it's profits for a selected few. Our book shows how the refinery is more than happy to use the low carbon transition to extract concessions from workers and throw them out of jobs. I would argue killing an entire city is worse than those jobs. I know that the book focuses on that. That's kind of the theme of the book, the fact that they're using the clean transition as an excuse that for bargaining with those employees.
Yeah, we know there's been very contentious bargaining in the last couple of years. And I guess that's their leverage, that this is all going clean eventually anyway.
Yeah. So I also talked to Steve Mann. I made a podcast episode out of it a couple of days ago. He is from Bloomberg Intelligence, and they just did Bloomberg Intelligence is part of the Bloomberg press organization that does financial research for investors, and you have to, get the terminal account. And they came out with a study where they surveyed 1,000 people in the United States about their EV purchase intentions. And so I talked to him about that. Steve was born in Windsor, Ontario, I found out, even though he lives in Princeton, New Jersey now, which is outside of New York. He's the son of an automotive worker and became a mechanical engineer and entered the industry many years ago. And he spent quite a few years in Hong Kong for Bloomberg Asia. And I was ready to question him about the fact that none of the Bloomberg people who analyze EVs own an EV. Now, I understand that they live in New York City, London, Hong Kong, places where you don't necessarily own a car in the huge metropolitan areas. But I also feel like they don't know what they're talking about sometimes. And so I was ready to question him on that. And he said, I bought my first EV a week ago, because he was on another podcast, which I listened to, the Bloomberg podcast, and I guess he was a guest on there before, and he refused to say what cars he's owned. He was very tight-lipped about it, and but he was driving different cars. So that was just a week ago, and shortly after that, I guess it drove him to go buy an EV. He bought a Chevy Blazer EV. There's a Chevy Blazer SUV, very popular car. They've made an EV version of it, and it's just coming to our dealership here. Just got one. I noticed on Facebook, I saw somebody posting about that. It was 63,000 Canadian. It's a bit more expensive, The thing is, the problem the Blazer has right now, before they come out with base versions, and maybe forever, is that it's not going to compete with the Model Y very well. It's similar in size to the Model Y. The Model Y has so many more advantages and a cheaper price by a few $1,000s. Like, I think they're around 55 now for a Y. Because you bought one recently, and I don't know if they're going up again, but at the end of the quarter, they were down to around 55 Canadian, and I don't know what that is in US dollars, but they were sort of at an all-time low.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so their office in Princeton, New Jersey is actually solar-powered, 100%. Like, they have little farms around the area.
Nice. And
40-something EV chargers. It's just a different world, Like, it's just than what we live in here, where people would say, why would you do that? And it's crazy.
Yeah, no, and there was just a story about Apple. They were proclaiming their clean energy credentials. They say now that 95% of their operations run on clean energy around the world, including their suppliers, which is pretty impressive.
A lot of big companies, including tech companies, are aiming for 2030 to do that. So, yeah, it's a fantastic building, too. I looked at a tour of it because I started to get interest. This helped him make his decision to buy an EV, but he had some interesting thoughts about it. Here's a clip from the show where he talks about what he thinks of his new first EV. And keep in mind that he's a mechanical engineer who's been in the automotive industry all along, has been writing about it, but now he has one.
So far, so good. I'm just so impressed. I've driven European cars before. I'm not going to say who. Always felt kind of steady on the road. They really hugged the road. And, I've driven a lot of American cars before when I was at GM. But the new Chevy Blazer EV, it actually feels like driving a European car. I don't know, because of the weight of the car. It just hugs the road. It's really quiet, right? Not quiet, not because there's no engine noise. They designed it so well that they cut out a lot of wind noise.
So it's almost like a luxury car in that sense, eh?
It actually felt like a luxury car. Feels like a luxury car. The interior feels like a luxury car. So I was pretty impressed by it.
Yeah, and he went on to talk about how he's getting used to one-pedal driving, which is completely new, of course. That's when the car regenerates and doesn't use brakes, but sort of you just use the gas pedal and nothing else. Unless there's an emergency braking situation, you just use one pedal, which my wife and I love, and apparently he and his wife love. He also mentioned that his wife loves the car too.
95% of the time, I never have to use the brake, and it's lovely. It's wonderful.
Yeah. You can catch the full interview on our podcast feed as episode 208, and it's also the audio version is on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay, so speaking of new electric vehicles, this story is from Electrek, and it's about Alfa Romeo, which is part of the Stellantis group of automotive companies. And so Alfa Romeo, now owned by Stellantis, they've got a new EV coming out, and they were going to call it the Milano after the town in Italy.
Okay.
And the Italian government said, no, you're not allowed to call it the Milano because the car is actually made in Poland. And as I mentioned off the top of the show, there are rules in other countries about this. You can't call it Champagne unless it comes from the Champagne region of France. And the Italian government is very annoyed. This is the first car that Alfa Romeo has made that's not made in Italy. This is their first time doing it. And in their statement, they said they can probably offer it about 10,000 euros cheaper by making it in Poland. So it's going to go for about 30,000 euros, which is quite a reasonable price. Would have been maybe 40,000 if they built it in Italy, according to Alfa Romeo. But
that's
this is the first time.
That's more of a difference than you would find in China-built vehicles.
But mostly I was impressed with that price of 30,000 euros if they can actually offer, that's similar to the American dollar in terms of price. But anyway,
this is a substantial vehicle. It's not a tiny little thing or anything. It's a decent size, kind of like the most popular segment there is in vehicles now in North America.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a Chevy Blazer size, maybe a little bit smaller than that. But yeah, it's called the Junior now. That's what they've decided to name it instead of the Milano. And the Milano is a much better name, but hey, you got to follow the
I got a Junior
laws
down at the dealership today. It's great.
Yeah, so apparently that is a name that they have used before. It was a coupe way back in the 70s. So there is precedent for using this name.
They should have named it after, there's probably another Milano somewhere in the world, a small town somewhere. They should have said, well, we named it after that.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
I'm full of them, Brian. I'm full of them.
Yeah, so it, they kind of fought back for a little while and thought that they could maybe get away with it, but they've decided rather than fight the government.
But Junior, they could have done better than Junior.
I know it's not a very good name, the Junior. But I assume that it can sometimes be hard to judge size from pictures, but I assume that means it's on the smaller size of this type of vehicle. So yeah, maybe slightly smaller than a Chevy Blazer or a Model Y.
I would put it in the Chevy Equinox class just by eyeballing it, but it's hard, like you say, it is hard to tell. But so what's the worst name, Junior or Toyota's BZ4X?
Yeah, BZ4X, that's got to be worse.
Okay.
For my money.
Well, the government of Quebec in Canada, which has Canada's best EV rebate program, very generous. In fact, I don't see why anyone in Quebec would buy a car that's not an EV in the last few years, eh?
Oh, when I see those rebates, I can't believe that people would still buy a gas car in Quebec.
You're throwing money out the window. It's ridiculous because you get $5,000 from the federal government and what, $9,000 from, $7,000 now, but I think it was $9,000 at one point. Yeah. So starting January 1st, 2025, the current $7,000 incentive offered to those buying full battery electric vehicles, also called BEVs for short, will fall to $4,000. Still, we have nothing here where we live. Most places in Canada don't. A year later, in 2026, it'll go down to $2,000, and by 2027, no incentives will be given. Now, we kind of all thought that even by now or 2025, we wouldn't need incentives, that they'd be at price parity. That hasn't quite happened yet, but it really sounds, we'll talk more about this later in the show, it really sounds like that's happening, and, I can't see them needing it by 2027 anyway, do you?
Yeah, I don't think so. It was always the plan to phase these things out. These were never going to go on indefinitely, but as EVs were kind of expensive, it sort of made sense to do these rebates. My preference would be that they just stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and the clean energy stuff will just be more competitive if subsidies disappeared or actual pollution prices applied to oil. But yeah, this is something of a compromise. But we all knew that they would eventually go away.
Well, let's dip into the mailbag.
All right. So our first letter here, this was sent to us on TikTok from a person with the handle 1000 Sunny. Hello, Brian and James. I'm a 17-year-old from Alberta, and I'd like to say my province is an uninformed mess. I was talking to a taxi one day, taking a taxi and talking to the driver. We spoke on the issue of space for solar panels, as she believes we don't have enough space. And Alberta is 5 times the size of Texas. This is a massive, massive region. Nothing but space. Most people around here don't believe in the viability of renewables, and it's pretty frustrating. Even some classmates have trouble believing. That's rural Alberta for you. Cheers.
And before you comment, I just want to say that the Pembina Institute did a study, and I think it's 0.5% of agricultural land would be needed to meet 2050. Like not now, but the end result, if we use solar in the mix to meet our goals of getting to net zero, it'd be 0.5% of agricultural land. And what the government of Alberta has done, the right-wing government has said, no, farmers can't decide what they put on their land. We decide. And, they've taken, the further right you go, the less rights you have as an individual, ironically, whether it's your body as a woman or if you're a farmer and you want to have solar in your land, you can't do it sometimes. They're taking that right away from you, which is very frustrating if you own land.
It's weird that the people who are going on and on about freedom all the time are often the ones that are most likely to take your freedom away from you. It's very strange, and I do not understand it.
My son is in university here in Saskatchewan, which is also got the same issues as Alberta, and he often speaks of classmates in engineering from rural Alberta or rural Saskatchewan, which you'd think would be smart kids, having very ignorant, weird views like that. And it's just ingrained in them. And it scares me to think that people like engineers would go into the world with, you want the smart people at least to know what's going on. But, Brian, when young people like this write to us saying that they have a bit of despair at the nonsense, it irks me even more. And day by day, more people will come to realize the truth about the energy transition. 1000 Sunny. So I asked AI to write a song for you to cheer you up.
In a small town in Alberta, where fields stretch wide and far, there's a 17-year-old dreamer with a fire in their heart. But they feel so out of place, like an outsider in disguise. 'Cause nobody understands the power of the sun up in the sky. They've read about the future, a world that can be so much more, where clean energy shines bright and we don't rely on oil no more. But their friends in cowboy hats think it's all some kind of myth. They call them a dream or say renewable energy's just a myth. But you're a shining light in the dust. Don't let them bring you down. You're a dreamer with a vision in this small little town. Let the sun be your guide. Let the wind carry your dreams. You can change the world. Don't you ever lose sight of what you believe.
So obviously I discovered the power of creating songs with AI just before I got sick.
Yeah, well, that was hugely entertaining, but you know, I have a lot of friends who are musicians and songwriters, and
I know.
I don't feel good about using AI to circumvent their art.
It's quite frightening, Brian. I asked it to create a theme song for our show, and it was just as I was getting sick, and it's still in my head. It's an earworm in my head, and it's like I gave it just a few bits of information, and it created a catchy tune, and I can't get it out of my head. It's just crazy.
I feel like every time we play one of these, we should actually, you know, hire a songwriter.
We can't afford that.
Or just send them a check. Hey, look, we didn't use your services.
We didn't pay the Pope for cloning his voice, but, you know, we're not going to do this on a regular basis. But, you know, I thought that would cheer Thousand Sunny up. And,
well, yeah. Apologies, though, to my songwriting friends.
Yes. Letter from Eric, who calls us on it whenever we accidentally call hydro clean power, which apparently we did last episode instead of low carbon power. He writes again saying, "Hi, Brian and James. Loved your last podcast as I do all your podcasts. However, I noticed the word clean again being associated with hydropower during the show. So I thought I'd share this article with you regarding potential impacts of dams that I hadn't thought of before. According to the study, the four lower Snake River dams potentially cause the emission of as much greenhouse gas emissions as burning 2 billion pounds of coal per year due to the changes in the river ecosystem. And these impacts are in addition to the already well-known destructive effect of damming wild rivers." You're right, Eric, but you picked the wrong week to complain about us forgetting.
There's a man from California, Eric's his name. They say he's got strong convictions about the power we consume, but he tells me hydro dams, they're just spelling our doom. He says, "Hey there, amigo, listen closely to my words. Hydro dams ain't the answer, they're not as clean as birds. Sure, they might be impressive with their water flow and might, but the truth is they're not low carbon, they're dirty power."
Eric, thanks for your letter, and thanks for listening to the show. We appreciate it. We'll try to do better, and we probably try to use AI less. But, you know, one of these days, you're going to show up listening to the podcast, and Brian and I are going to be AI. We're just going to be putting our feet up by the pool, drinking margaritas, and it's going to do everything for us. We're probably like 2 days away from that happening.
Yeah, and I can guarantee you I'm going to one day again call hydropower clean power instead of low carbon power. I can guarantee I'm going to do it.
Well, we should have AI clean up our podcast for us and correct these things. That'll happen one of these days too.
There was a big story this week. They're going to spend a couple of $1 billion refurbishing the hydro dams at Niagara Falls.
Is that right?
And one of them's been running for over 100 years, apparently.
Is that on the American side?
Both sides, the Canadian and American sides, both have hydropower. The one I read about was a Canadian one it's over 100 years old, and I'm assuming they've done upgrades in that time. But yeah, so they're going to refurbish them and add some more power to them.
Are they going to turn off the falls for a few days? Just
Oh yeah. There's just a tap.
Okay.
You turn.
Well, waste of water.
Okay, a story here from Electrek. Electric cars are saving Americans billions, even people who don't drive them. So this is an interesting story because a lot of the doomsayers often say that, adding all these electric cars, it's just going to crash the grid and cause more problems. And we've always assumed that wasn't true. And now we have a report to back it up. So a recent report by the group Synapse Energy Economics, they examined how much electric car owners paid for electricity compared with the cost for the utilities to build, generate, and distribute that electricity. And what they found was, in aggregate, EV drivers provided more than $3 billion in net revenue to the grid between 2011 and 2021.
That's nothing, though, because there was hardly any electric cars around during that time. So quite interesting.
Yes. But in terms of looking at what all these utilities have had to spend, because, they all have to spend money in order to, generate this power, and upgrades will be needed, absolutely. But, there's an economy of scale here that, the more electricity on the grid, it's going to get cheaper not more expensive. And as long as they manage their resources properly and don't wait too long to expand the grid, to add more energy onto the grid, everything is just going to get cheaper for people. And, already this has been proven from 2011 to 2021.
Well, imagine if there's a whole bunch of cars. Imagine if everyone had an EV or, it always didn't make sense to me that why would you, if your product is this, why aren't you supporting the use of that? If you want to, because a lot of grids are privately owned.
Yeah. I know in Ontario, for instance, when they had a lot of power, like maybe back in the 60s and 70s, when they had maybe their nuclear power plants were coming along, or they were encouraging people to put electric heating in their homes, which in Canada, traditionally, it's been natural gas. That's been the cheapest thing. But when the power was plentiful and they had lots of it in Ontario, they were encouraging people because they wanted to sell more electricity. So the problem is that over time, the electricity rates increased. So any of those people that did put in electric heat in the 70s probably ended up regretting it as those prices got higher. Of course, now we have high efficiency heat pumps that can heat your home. The same thing with electricity, but with a high efficiency, engine to it.
But we also had heat pumps back then. We just weren't using them in North America. Now they outdo furnaces in installs because people in the Northeast United States and Southeast are switching from heating oil, which has to be delivered and is expensive, and to electric heat pumps.
But then of course the other thing is, of course, with all the EVs on the grid, it's made the air cleaner. So this is a win-win. It's making your electricity bills go down, even if you don't drive an EV. And of course, the air gets cleaner, the more gas cars we can take off the road. Yeah,
well, that's a good story. And I expect more of that. I remember when my partner had electric heat in her apartment back when it was probably 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt, half of what it is now, less than half. And still expensive. It's still an expensive way to heat your home.
Yeah, well, in BC and Canada, they still pay, I think, as little as 6 cents a kilowatt hour. They have cheap power there. So heat pumps make a lot of sense if you're in BC.
We have some economically challenged relatives whose furnace broke a number of years ago, quite a few years ago. They've been relying on heat, just rigged heat, electric heat ever since. And it's like,
oh, is that right?
That's not a good way to go, especially with electricity rates going up and all that. It's time for the tweet of the week. This is, oh God, I hate saying his name. Colin McKecker.
I'm not going to try it.
Colin McKecker, head of clean transport at Bloomberg NEF. Somebody I follow, is a good person to follow. He's an analyst for electric transportation. We are heading for serious overcapacity in the battery market. Good news for automakers and EV buyers, but challenging times ahead for new entrants to the battery game. I've posted a chart here for you to look at, Brian. The low one here says they have about 8 terawatts planned. We're always talking about, battery mega factories, gigafactories coming online every day. We could talk about it. Well, apparently there's too much of it because the demand is only less than a quarter of that. So that's what happened with solar panels. There was a glut, but this could be a big glut too, and really, really drop prices.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's eventually a good thing. This was never going to be a smooth transition. There was always lots of balls to juggle, and EV penetration in the U.S. for new car sales is only around like 7 or 8% right now. So the demand for batteries isn't where we would like it to be. It's going to get there soon. But yeah, it does make it sometimes tough for these companies either making solar panels or batteries to do it and to make a profit on it and keep running.
So Och Hoekstra of Neon Research responded. He's also somebody I follow on Twitter, a good follow. A while ago, the media was overflowing with pundits complaining battery production would be unable to keep up with growing demand. Hence, Toyota's claim we should use hybrids with small batteries. So now I'm angry because the media was doing that. And there was all this complaints that in politicians and rhetoric that going around, and I'm sure rural Alberta was talking about this. Well, now we're going to have too many batteries. So what are we going to do? So now we will see complaints about battery overproduction, probably, he says. I think it's a good thing. I think because, one day you're going to wake up and all EVs are going to be an economic proposition that you can't refuse. And, you know, it's not just the purchase price, but the use of them is a lot cheaper and a lot better. And, you know, now that, you know, EV analysts have EVs themselves, you know, that's what we need. We need everyone to sort of, you know, I'd kill for a politician to have one. That would be something, you know?
Yeah. EV prices here in Canada, the US are still too high. And I guess this means they're, you know, heading down just a little slower than we would like. Okay, the Bureau of Land Management in the U.S. So this is part of the U.S. Department of the Interior. And this is a press release from them. And they have stated that they're going to make the process easier for geothermal energy production. So as near as I can tell, this is kind of written in government speak. It's a little hard to necessarily parse everything that they're saying here, but they're going to streamline the process for the initial permitting. So it doesn't mean that they're going to eliminate environmental reviews for geothermal projects, except at the beginning. So the initial stages where you're looking to get a geothermal project started in the US, boom, you can just do it. You can cite these. There's 2 different exemptions in the rule as part of the National Environmental Policy Act. And so, yeah, as near as I can tell, this is for the initial exploration permitting process. And then as you get further along, you will still need some type of review. But this is great because it's a recognition that we need to start moving quickly. And, you know, into clean energy, regulation is one of the things that's stopping the energy transition because it can be really slow to get, you know, stuff, you know, added onto the grid, even for people putting solar panels on their house. Sometimes you get the solar panels on your house and you have to wait a couple of months for your utility to come and approve them. It's, you know, it's part of the processes we have to speed up if we're going to try and make this transition as quick as possible.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that we can accelerate the transition is speeding up the permitting process, because places in the world that have done that, like Australia, well, solar on roofs just took off because that's, you know, whenever it's uncertainty for investment and for borrowing money, and it adds to the cost greatly. So it's unnecessary perhaps in a lot of ways. And, you know, we want to be cautious, but we also are actually trying to protect the planet in a crisis situation here. So I'm good for an expedient balance, let's put it that way, between permitting and getting these things going.
Yeah, and it says here in the release, categorical exclusions like this define activities as a whole have been determined to pose no significant risk to the quality of the human environment. So, yeah, geothermal, there's going to be environmental impacts, but this is nothing like putting in an oil well. This is nothing like putting up a nuclear reactor, and this recognizes that. You're
drilling a hole into the ground, not through the groundwater, but deeper, far deeper than that. So it's not affecting the groundwater or anything like that. Sometimes you have to build a road to the place where you're doing it. And but yeah, no, we're still waiting on ours here. We have one experimental one that's been going for 4 years, was promised in 2. I know new mines in the United States typically take 10 years to permit. That's a long time, maybe a bit too long. I don't know if they want to participate in the, you know, the battery revolution, as it were.
But yeah, there is geothermal plants producing electricity around the world. Not so much here in North America, but this could definitely be a part of the solution.
It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Guess what, Brian? The Rivian R1T electric pickup truck, built by a startup in the United States, is now the safest pickup truck in the United States, according to the IIHS, the people who know best on that issue. So that's good to know. Not terribly surprising, though. Tesla is cutting 10% of its workforce, as we alluded to earlier. Electric says it has 3 sources that claim the Model 2 will now be shelved as they focus on a robotaxi. Ford's Blue Cruise hands-free driver assist is under investigation after 2 fatal crashes. A lot of people associate self-driving with Tesla, but virtually every major automaker has a version of highway self-driving. And Ford's is called Blue Cruise, GM's is called Super Cruise, and it basically does everything for you on the highway. And yeah, I was wondering, because you don't hear much about that, I wonder if Tesla's blows up the news headlines everywhere when something happens with them. Well, apparently one of these has definitely had the Blue Cruise on. So, but it is something you have to monitor. It's not full self-driving. They have cameras on you to make sure you're not sleepy and your eyes are pointed straight ahead and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it's all a step forward. There's going to be exceptions and there are going to be unfortunate crashes. But, just think about cars, even cars sold now. There's cars where you could just put on the cruise control and have a heart attack and die and nothing happens. Like the car just keeps going.
Hopefully to a hospital.
We can't.
I want heart attack detection in the software update, so it takes you to the nearest emergency and starts honking. Honking in the pattern of a heart rate. It was revealed this week that the United States warned Ukraine not to attack Russian oil refineries with long-range drones, which is disappointing because, the United States is doing that because they want gas prices to be low, because that hurts them politically, the people in office. Yeah. If it's not. Yeah. I'm a little disappointed in that. Yeah, I shouldn't say that out loud, but I don't cry when a Russian oil refinery goes. You know why? It's because they're getting 600 million euros per day from fossil fuel exports still, even though you're not supposed to buy Russian oil. They're still doing it. The Russian economy is very much tied to oil. They're doing it through India and China. New York Attorney General Letitia James, friend of the show, announced they would be suing the world's largest meat company, JBS, for misleading customers about its climate commitments. It caused a stir far beyond the world of food. The suit's impact has the potential to influence the approach of all kinds of big businesses as they take in their advertising about sustainability, according to experts, says The Guardian. So this, another lawsuit that's going to change things, greenwashing and mislabeling and doing things like that. A political poll suggests independent voters in the United States have a similarly positive view on EVs as Democrats. And those independent voters are the ones who decide elections because everyone's in their corner. It's those independents in the middle that go back and forth and change the government. They suggest this could cost Republicans in the polls because, independents are pro-EV. French newspaper L'Echo reported the EDF had upped the estimated cost of building 6 new reactors in France, nuclear reactors, by 30%. So France, we look at France and say, well, they're the best. They have nothing but nuclear reactors practically. They should be, there shouldn't be cost overruns there. Well, it turns out even a 30% in France, which got my attention. It's game over for gas heating in Augsburg, the first major city in Germany, that's 300,000 people, that has announced plans for ending the use of fossil fuel gas in its heating systems and informed customers of its intentions to cut off the gas grid within the next few years. That's courtesy of Jan Rosenow on Twitter. So, yeah. That's something. It is. It's not only like you can't, there's lots of regulations in cities and some jurisdictions where if you build a new building, a new business, or a house, you can't put in natural gas heating. You have to have electric heating. This goes beyond that. That says we're cutting off the gas. We're not going to burn. You're going to have to change if you have gas, and that's an issue. Yeah, and I don't know much about Augsburg, but I had a short film play at the Augsburg Film Festival back in the 90s, although I didn't actually go to the festival, but that's the only reason I know the town Augsburg. Well, the projector was run off of gas, more than likely. So, yeah. A landmark climate decision, the Supreme Court of India has ruled that an individual's right to life includes protection against the impacts of climate change. The verdict reflects fundamental rights stated in the country's constitution. Quote, without a clean environment which is stable and unimpacted by the vagaries of climate change, the right to life is not fully realized, the decision of the court said. Quote, the right to health is impacted due to factors such as air pollution, shifts in vector-borne diseases, rising temperatures, droughts, shortages in food supplies due to crop failure, storms, and flooding. Another good decision. Like to hear it. And here, you like decisions? Here's another one. The European Court of Human Rights sided with a group of elderly women from Switzerland who said their government violated their rights by contributing to climate change, which in turn exacerbated heat waves that ended up threatening their health. The decision is binding and makes clear that all 46 countries are party to the European Court of Human Rights must ensure they're taking science-based measures to mitigate the current and future fallout of climate change. One lawyer said the ruling was, quote, groundbreaking by directly linking government action on climate change to human rights obligations. So that's good news. And finally this week, renewable energy has supplied, you may have heard about this, 100% of California's energy demand for between 15 minutes and 6 hours in 30 of the last 38 days. A historic first for the Golden State, says Newsweek. So basically, when the sun shines in the middle of the day, it takes up, the wind and water, where geothermal and hydro will power the entire state and sometimes more than 100%, so they'll export it. If there's a little bit of baseload gas or nuclear going on, they don't count that because it's even more than that. So wind, solar, and hydro energy is now exceeding demand across the state, producing more energy than Californians require on almost a daily basis. Data for Friday, April 12th, for example, showed solar, wind, geothermal, and hydro energy exceeded the demand for 6 hours and averaged at 2/3 of total supply across the whole day. Over 80% of renewable energy was supplied from solar. Gotta love solar. I love solar. You know that if you listen to the show. The news was made even more impressive as California has the world's largest grid-connected battery storage facility, which only went online in January, Brian. So, yeah, the batteries help.
Yeah, this is encouraging news because, of course, this is kind of like the grid of the future. As we've often talked about, here in Canada, we have a fairly clean, I was going to say clean grid, low carbon grid.
Thank you.
Because it's something like 86% low carbon, a lot of nuclear and tons of hydro. But California never had that. This is because of new additions that they've been making of, wind, solar, and batteries and managing the hydro resources that they have. So, Canada was already fairly low carbon. But yeah, California, this is the grid of the future. This is what everyone can do. This shows that every grid can make these upgrades and eventually get to 100% clean energy.
And that's the lightning round.
Yeah, and that's our show for this week. Please take the time to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we are Clean Energy Pod. And you can leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show. Also, videos on TikTok, James?
That's correct, yeah. Oh.
And other special content like YouTube.
That's right.
And special extra episode earlier this week that James had. So please rate and review us on Apple or wherever you're getting your podcast. There's a donation link with PayPal in the show notes if you want to send us some money our way. And please subscribe to the app and we'll give you new episodes every week.
See you next week.
Climate change is on our minds. Gotta find a way to leave it all behind. Solar power, wind power too. It's time to make a change. It's what we gotta do. Power in the future, it's in our hands. Together we can make a stand. Let's harness the sun.